Hello and welcome back to the story Nook. I am on lunch. It is hot as shit. My car says it's 95 degrees outside. That's how hot it is. We're going to continue chapter 5 of I'd Rather Have a Cat Than a Harem. And I don't remember. Okay, here we go. Because I was reading this morning. His wings are so strong that he could fly to the ocean from here with ease, explained Marvin. So the person in charge of his care had gotten worried because Rudel hadn't come back at the expected time. We have to check, said the prince. The three of them nodded and got off their horses, fastening them to a nearby tree. One of the escorts that had been trailing them at the rear of the party joined them as well. Coincidentally, it was the knight Daros, whom Amy remembered accompanying her at a tea party. Edward was usually guarded by two knights, but Marvin, as the former member of the military, fulfilled the role of the second guard. Darius, therefore, was the only knight traveling with them. The other knight had stayed behind with Isabel at the stables. Darius was intense with sharp, observant eyes that radiated complete focus and attention. In her past life, she would have pinned him for a member of the Yakuza. But she was only frightened of his outward appearance. In every other aspect, he was incredibly polite. So can members of the Yakuza. Have you seen House Husband? And there's another one. I do not remember the name of it. I will find it and I'll leave it in the comments when I can. It's another cute one. Looking at him, Amy reflected on her own self-centered, incorrect assumption of the Knights of the Royal Guard. That the Knights of the Royal Guard were gangly, feeble men who cared more about outward appearance and social status than skill. Marvin suggested that the rest of the group wait there while he went to check it out alone. Edward protested. I'm coming too. It's better to bring backup in case you get hurt. And I also helped raise Brutal. Amy will stay here. It was natural for him to get so worried, even after Brutal had grown up and become a messenger bird. Edward would still care for him occasionally. But this time, Amy shook her head in protest. I'll go too. I can do a little healing magic. The other three looked surprised at her offer. Many girls started learning magic from a young age, however, being able to use it as a technique required training and the stabilization of the user's magical power. This typically happened much later, around the time they went off to school. Although Amy came from a family with high magical aptitude, in the end, this was a matter of her individual talent. No one had ever thought someone so young could actually use magic, and healing magic, a very difficult specialty at that. Wait, you know how to use healing magic already? Marvin asked, meeting Amy's eyes with a serious expression. I've healed my brother's fractured finger in cuts about this big, said Amy, indicating with her fingers the width of about 2 inches. But I'm not sure how effective my magic is on animals. Any act of medical care is built on trust as the foundation. I just have to explain it better, sought Amy as she clarified her statements. But I can't make the injuries heal right away. It took a couple of days for his wounds to heal and his bones to fuse back together. All this happened during the family's test to prove if she had learned how to do magic. Whether she could get a cat had depended on the results. Harold had waltzed back home with a deep gash at the edge of his right eye, almost exactly where the Otome game character had a scar, and 2 fractured fingers on his left hand to boot. But despite this, Harold had joked, "It's just what you need for your chest, isn't it?" Apparently he had not avoided the magical beast attacks on purpose, just to get injured. Wow, way to go, big bro. The way her mother's eyebrows rose when she learned that was terrifying. He sat there getting lectured with his head bowed while Amy performed healing magic on him. Amy agreed with her mother, privately thinking that it'd do him good to feel a little remorse. No, teenage boys do not do the remorsey thing. Amy had trembled as she healed him, afraid the gash would leave a scar and transform him into a perfect clone of the character from the game. But she had used all the magic he had and healed it perfectly, despite it being a deep cut. When she told them about this test, Marvin and Darius doubted their ears. A wound incurred from a magical beast was very difficult from a regular sword was very different from a regular sword cut, and Amy claimed she had healed one the day after it had been inflicted and without leaving a scar. Even with a bone fracture, recovery was unbelievable. The standard magic treatment only involved reducing pain and speeding up recovery, not fusing the bones back together. Amy herself didn't seem to know how amazing her story was. But Darius, who had suffered injuries during his training, and Marvin, a former member of the military, were keenly aware. I mean, girl just wanted her cat. I pressed the wrong button. Like, girlie just wanted her kitty cat. Can you blame her? Only a few doctors in the royal capital could perform the level of healing magic Amy had performed. Healing magic worked by amplifying and accelerating the patient's own powers of recovery. It was also vital to discern whether forcibly healing an injury was necessary, as it could be hard on the patient and often have an adverse effect on their recovery. And although it was possible to counteract poisons and expel foreign substances with healing magic, it wasn't all powerful. If something was removed, it couldn't be grown back. Healing magic was also more effective when used by practitioners who had a thorough knowledge of the subject's internal anatomy. Though Amy's memories of her previous life, she had advanced knowledge about the human body for this world. So her healing magic was effective as long as her magical powers were stable. But unfortunately, she didn't have any knowledge at all about bird anatomy. Besides, if that bird, which might be Rudel, didn't have any strength left, performing any healing magic might prove to be difficult. But Amy couldn't just stand around and twiddle her thumbs. Marvin, however, stooped down to Amy's eye level and looked concerned. That is reassuring, but there's lots of undergrowth here. You might get hurt on the thorny branches. I'm wearing boots today, and I'm used to them already, so I'll be fine. Wouldn't it be better to treat him as soon as possible? They still seem to be hesitating on whether to allow their guest, the daughter of an earl, to walk down a trailless path into the forest, but Amy flashed the high lace boots that matched her riding dress and smiled reassuringly. Ever since she was a little girl, the natural landscape, the mountains, the seas that sprawled across her father's land and her grandfather's estate in the border province had been her personal playground. She had often swum, fished, and even climbed trees. She had usually just stuck by her older brother's side, but now that she thought about it, they probably weren't the sort of adventures noble ladies were supposed to have. She supposed she had been allowed because her parents had both been reincarnated from a different world with different expectations. Plus, they had always been an outdoorsy family. At the moment, the sound of the bird crying reached him again. It sounded much weaker than it did before. Edward turned toward Amy, who was so worried she felt on the verge of tears. We don't have time. We'll all go. Amy will come with me, he said, suddenly grabbing her hand. When Amy looked up surprised, Edward smiled and gave her a nod. With the prince's backing, Marvin finally accepted it. I'll take the lead then, and Darius will bring up the rear. Although Rudel was nearing retirement, he had the best track record of all the messenger birds. Edward was very grateful there was someone there who could perform healing magic. Both Marvin and Darius could do emergency first aid treatment, but healing remedies were often more effective. Amy's surprised eyes alternated between the hand Ed was holding to his face. Ed, I can walk on my own. If you don't want to hold hands, I'll carry you. Carry? It's dangerous out there, he explained simply. Amy's heart thudded. Does he even know what he's saying? No matter how you looked at it, Amy's body was going to be heavy in the prince's thin arms. Amy had wanted to gain weight, but she still felt shy about it in some respects. God forbid it, the prince were to collapse while carrying her bridal saddle. She felt like she would lose an essential part of her identity as a woman. She quickly grabbed his hand back and squeezed it tightly. That's a shame. Don't let go then. A shame? What's a shame? Pretending not to hear, Amy could only give a stiff nod after making sure their hands were linked securely. Edward's hand was surprisingly large and firm under his glove. Amy's heart skipped a couple of beats. It felt so different from when she held her mother as her father's hand. But if this was what she had to do to avoid being carried, she didn't really have a choice. The forest was sent, just as she had been warned, but there was no hesitation in Marvin's footsteps as he pressed, pushing tall grass and branches out of the way, relying on the birds' cries for directions. Amy had started breathing harder, but she followed Edward and didn't fall behind. That's somewhere around here. After moving forward for a moment, Marvin stopped. There was a small, dark, weak spot on the tree in front of them, with white feathers scattered around it. Amy sucked in a quiet breath, her heart shattering with the scene of the tragedy came into view. Edward released Amy's hand, removed his gloves, and used his fingers to whistle loudly. Sorry. Mucus building up in my body. I work outside doing park maintenance. It is a fucking treat, I promise. There was a muffled noise close by, as if in response. Thank goodness it's alive! Marvin instantly used his arm to brush aside the thicket ahead where the noise came from. Inside the thicket there was a large owl with pure white feathers stained dark red, and with one of his wings extended, his attempts at movement were clumsy and awkward. Amy gasped. Its head was Rudel! Amy had totally forgotten to ask what kind of bird Rudel was. She had almost called him the name of an owl character from a famous fantasy movie and book franchise from her previous life. Fortunately, Edward's cry had darfed hers, and it didn't seem like anyone had noticed her slip-up. She had covered her bladder mouth with her hands, but she gasped at the sight of the pitiful bird. Despite being weak, Rudel was very excited to see them, but it was dangerous for an injured bird to move. Marvin removed the coat he had been wearing, and when he covered the bird's head with it, Rudel finally settled down. He calms down when he can't see anything, he explained to Amy, who was watching with concern as he wrapped Rudel up in the jacket. I see. The bleeding seems to be coming from the bottom of his torso, just around the joint of his leg. Marvin continued, holding the bird up. Darius peered at the wound as Amy and Edward drew closer. Marvin told him of his suspicion that Rudel had probably been coming back from wherever he had been injured, but he had run out of stamina and fallen here before he could make it to the castle. He probably hurt his wing because of the fall, he continued, but fortunately it doesn't seem to be broken. That's good. Well, maybe good isn't the right word for it, replied Edward. What caused the original injury? This is no arrow wound, Your Highness, said Darius. I'd wager it's from a magical beast. Rudel would go wild whenever anyone tried to get closer. Look at the wound, so no one could say for certain. But Marvin, who also had some experience hunting magical beasts, agreed it had almost certainly been done by such a creature. Edward continued his inquiry with a stern look, but the flight paths of messenger birds avoid all magical beast habitats, don't they? Darius, have you heard of anything from the Order of Knights? Just that there had been some strong gales coming from the west last night. Maybe he had been blown off course. Marvin and Edward nodded at this. It was to Rudel's credit that he had managed to return so close to the castle in his battered state. Amy didn't know what caused his injuries, but she knew she had to do something to fix them. Is it all right if I treat him now? That's right, yes, please do, said Edward. Please watch out for his beak and claws. He's usually calm, but he's very on edge right now. Nodding, Amy sat on the ground and gently brought the bundle that cocooned Rudel onto her lap without the slightest bit of hesitation. She was a little surprised he was heavier than he looked. That's a good birdie, Rudel. You'll be all right now, she said soothingly, removing her gloves. Healing magic worked by touching the patient's body directly. As she continued to murmur sweet words to Rudel, she gently slipped a hand under the cloth. This way, he wouldn't panic, and the cloth wouldn't slip off mid-treatment. Edward kneeled next to Amy and looked on anxiously, but she couldn't afford to worry about him, because as soon as her fingertips touched Rudel's feathers, he started twisting violently. When Edward put his hand over the cloth and called out to him, the bird calmed down once more. Rudel really thinks of Edward as his parent, Amy realized. His soft feathers were hard and stiff in places, probably because of the bleeding and the mud he had fallen into. Poor thing, that must have been so painful and scary. Each time she touched one of the stiffed areas, Amy felt her throat tighten and hot tears threatened to spill from her eyes. Although they were separated by layers of cloth, it was surprisingly painful with Brutal, strong claws dug into her thigh. But Amy knew this was nothing compared to how much pain the bird was in. Taking in a deep breath, Amy endued her hand with magic. And we have this beautiful image. So we have her treating Bird under the cloth as he also helps calm Birdie. So this is Edward. This is our beautiful little Amy. She's adorable. I love her. We're going to go back to automatic zoom. Make sure all of my things are still recording. The riding grounds at the castle were enormous, as were the stables. The stables were mostly composed of horse stalls, but it also had a residential annex for the caretakers, and a large lounge where the royalty and nobles who were visiting or touring the facilities could sit and talk. After being casually shown around the area, Isabel had been ushered into the reception room and was feeling totally at ease, absorbed in the conversation. Her conversation was none other than the third princess head maid, Hannah, who coincidentally had also been Isabel's governess as a girl. Hannah, I'm so pleased to see you haven't changed a bit. That's supposed to be my line, Lazy Isabel, said Hannah. So, was this all your idea? Isabel blinked, staring back blankly, looking so innocent and childlike that Hannah could hardly believe she already had a teenage son. What were you thinking, tutted Hannah? And when your daughter has had such a beautiful face, too. Isabel seemed to read between the lines as she pouted and let out a sigh. I think it was a mistake, too. But you can still... Amy was an unbelievably beautiful little girl, but when she gained weight, she only became even more beautiful, Isabel exclaimed, lamenting about the unexpectedly adorable transformation. She may be my daughter, but she's killing me here. Killing you? Isabel started to gush about Amy in front of the entire party. Hannah, taken aback at how drastically Isabel had misunderstood her, and the other maid and knight stationed with them. Her little cheeks are so round and plump, and her hands are so squishy and soft. Her stocky arms are just so full of life and vitality. They look so nice, don't they? Of course, her health is always at the forefront of my mind, and I've always tried to balance her meals and physical exercise. And now her skin positively glows. Her hair is so lustrous. Lady Isabel, Hannah managed to squeeze in, but Isabel was just getting started. But Amy's getting a growth spurt with her metabolism so high. If we relax our routine, she'll just shoot up in height and get skinny again. Maintaining her figure is quite a challenge. You see, despite how she looks, she loves being active. Even at home, she always runs around in the garden with her cat. But exercise is important. It wouldn't be healthy if she didn't get adequate activity. Indeed. And she burns up so many calories during magic practice, too. Well, Amy's very willing to cooperate with me on things, so we do manage to maintain her weight pretty well. But frankly speaking, I'd like to see her gain 5 more pounds. I'm well aware, of course, that our goal isn't just a number on the scale, but I get so worried that if her petite frame were skinny, she would so easily be abducted and carried away. And then, Lady Isabel, please. But Hannah, you've seen her, haven't you? Those cute little chubby cheeks. Don't you just want to squeeze them? I can't say I do. Her cheeks certainly did look like they would feel soft and squishy, and the beauty of her facial features shone through the chubbiness surrounding them well enough. But that was never the issue. I have no idea what you mean about calories, but I can gather that quite a lot of work went into maintaining her figure. If it's so difficult, then why go to all the trouble? Beauty standards change as quickly as the direction of the wind, you know. I just don't think people should obsess over something so temporary that they lose sight of what's really important, said Isabel, as Isabel looked at Hannah. Her gold eyes were filled with certainty. Hannah had known for more than 20 years that whenever her former pupil had that look in her eye, her mind was made up. His Highness is a very fine gentleman, Hannah said. I agree with you there. But if he were a lord or a bard, it wouldn't make a difference. All I want from Life is my child's happiness, that's all. It's just that simple, Isabel concluded impressively, like she had just finished giving a speech to Parliament. But you couldn't think of any other way? You can't change someone's face or personality. And you must admit it's a pretty effective way of weeding out people who base their decisions based on appearances alone. Besides, she shrugged, she draws power from her body when she uses magic, too. Hannah had known that Isabella's daughter had a high magical aptitude. She had also heard that Amy had recently started to get serious about her magical studies. That's true, Hannah admitted, but she didn't have to start so early. She had her reasons. We didn't force her into it. She just wanted to do it more than anything. Amy had wanted to learn magic as quickly as she could so she could get a cat. That had been her clear purpose. Isabel chuckled to herself. To Amy, her reason for studying had been a matter of utmost importance, but Isabel thought other people probably wouldn't see it that way. Isabel was able to show others her daughter's seriousness about magic simply by the speed at which she had learned it, which had in fact greatly surpassed Isabel's own expectations. I know you, Lady Isabel, so I didn't assume you had forced her to do anything absurd, said Hannah. Who was she studying under, by the way? Sir Dion, at my father's introduction. He said she was much more talented than she looked. Everyone there, including Hannah, gazed at Isabel in amazement. Sir Dion used to be the head magician of the royal palace. He was currently a teacher at the Royal Academy, but he was infamous for being mercilessly strict with students. Even now, he was one of the top magicians in the country. But others found him very intimidating and had a hard time approaching him. The knight in the room couldn't help sitting a little straighter as he remembered the tough lessons Sir Dion gave him. Sir Dion? His teaching methods are very good, and he seems to get along well with Amy. That shy little girl is so taken with him. Sometimes she'll call him Professor Pop-Pop in secret. What? Cried Hannah, looking like she doubted her own ears. That's unbelievable. Oh, something started ringing in Hannah's pocket. My apologies. It sounded like a bell, but it was actually Hannah's magical communication device. Isabella urged her to answer with a pointed look, so Hannah quickly excused herself from the table and answered the call. Although the magical device couldn't be used at long distances, calls could be made within the castle grounds, making it very convenient for communication between the servants. Darius, what happened? Well, yes, I understand. Please take care. Isabel still had some time before Amy was supposed to return, but if one of the knights guarding them called, something unexpected must have happened. When no panic or impatient anxiety crept into Hannah's face, however, Isabel assumed it must have been a low-level emergency. Isabel slowly brought her teacup to her mouth and savored the flavor while Hannah finished the call. Did something happen to Amy and the others, she asked. They found an injured messenger bird, so they should be returning soon. Poor Widow Birdie. How many more pages? A lot more pages. This is page 99. I've got 9 more pages. So we're going to end this here because I've got like 10 minutes left of my break. And I want to, eat food. Put on sunscreen because I got to do that. So, yeah. Thank you all so much for being here. And thank you for being here while I read this awesome book. It's great. I'd rather have a cat than a harem by Kozu Kobato. You're all wonderful. You're all awesome. So, yeah. This was part 2 of chapter 5. I'll read part 3 probably later. And I read part 1 of chapter 5 earlier. We're doing this in parts because I take my breaks. So, yeah. Have a lovely day. I hope you remember all to stay hydrated. Have an awesome time. Thank you, everyone who is watching and supporting me while I create art and do all the other things. My phone is ringing with a number I don't recognize. But yeah. Stay safe and all that, y'all. Bye bye.
其實係冇負分。